Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video it's just going to be a very quick update video and basically a follow-on video for anyone who's watched the previous video I've made about growing bush beans on a windowsill. So at this stage, this is about a month or two later now. As you can see, the plant has got a lot larger. There's also quite a lot of branching going on with the plant, and I've had to stake it as well because what happens is when it gets quite large it can fall over. Most bush beans should hold themselves up, but sometimes it might just flop over, so just keep an eye on it. You might need to give it a stake. I've not done any pruning with this, and depending on what variety of bush bean you have, you might not need to do any pruning. If it's a very dwarf variety of bush bean like this one, then you don't need to do any pruning at all. Basically, each shoot that comes up only grows 2 or 3 leaves and then flowers, and so it stays nice and compact. But if you do find you get some longer shoots coming off anywhere, just give them a trim if they're starting to look too long and leggy, and that will just encourage more side branches to shoot and you'll get a bushier plant. So as I say, this is done quite well. Lots of side shoots. It keeps putting out new growth, and it's got quite a few beans on it now. So I'd just like to show you generally the size of the bean when it's ready to pick, and also how you should be looking after it at this stage of growth. So once you start getting a good crop of bean like this, like these ones here, you want to be picking them when they're fairly small. Now it will depend a lot on the variety of how big they'll get. This one seems to be quite a small type, but basically you want them to start fattening up probably about 1/2 centimetre in thickness. That's about the size you're looking at. Now the way you tell if it's ready or not is not so much by its length, because they vary quite a lot in their length, but it's how thick the pods are, and you certainly don't want to see any shape of the beans coming through the pods. Now you can pick them also when they're really young, such as this one here, but you'll just get a much smaller harvest. You'll get more tender beans with picking them this size, but the harvest will be much smaller. So I would go for ones about this kind of size, but again, you're going for the thickness of the bean, not so much the length of the bean, because it can vary on plant to plant. But when you're at a stage where you've got a good amount of beans starting to crop, you probably want to then sow some more beans for a second plant, because dwarf beans, they don't keep going on forever. You'll get a good crop out of them for a month or two, and then once you've cropped them for about a month or two, then they're really kind of finished, and you'll need to plant a new bean to then get another crop. So once they start cropping nicely like this, I would go ahead and sow another one, and then by the time this one dies down and is finished cropping, the newer younger plant will be in full growth, and you'll have lots of more beans coming along. So you want to probably sow new beans every month or two. That way you'll have a constant supply over the summertime. You can't really grow them in winter because there's not enough light, and you can't grow them in autumn unless you're in a warmer country. But if you're in the subtropics or the tropics, you can grow them in winter. It shouldn't be a problem. Or if you have grow lamps, you can also grow them in winter. So the way I've been feeding this plant is I've been giving it tomato feed. I did give it a little bit of general feed because it started to go a bit yellow. If you do find any of the leaves going yellow like this, then give it a general feed, something that's got a balanced feed. So you're looking at the NPK rating on the back of the fertilizer package. Make sure the 3 numbers are quite even in how they are. So for example, you want all the numbers to be about the same value. But then if it's looking pretty healthy, go for a tomato feed. The NPK values on them, the numbers will be higher for the potassium and phosphorus, but they'll be lower for the nitrogen. So that's the kind of feed regime you want to go with. Tomato feed most of the time, but if it's starting to look a bit yellow, give it some balanced feed just for a little while until it perks up a bit. They are quite hungry feeders, especially if you have them in a small pot, so I would feed them probably once a week, maybe every 2 weeks, depends how strong they're growing. If the growth seems to slow at all, just feed them a little bit more. So when it comes to harvesting them, let's say this about the size you want, you can just cut them off with a pair of scissors or secateurs. So I'm just going to cut these all now to give you an indication of how many I've got. You do want to regularly cut them as well, because this encourages more to come on. So the more often you cut the beans and harvest them, the more it will keep producing. Once it's produced lots and lots of beans and it starts fattening up and creating seeds, it's going to stop. It's going to put all the energy into the beans and no energy into new ones, and it's the young tender pods you want, not the thick mature beans. So just keep cropping as often as you can. That makes sure that the plant should last for longer. So for example, you can see in here I've got a small crop of beans. I would expect to have this number probably every week or two. Depends how the plant's doing, but I'd expect about every 2 weeks or so you should be able to crop this many at a time. But as I say, don't generally go for them all at once if you can. Just pick them as and when they're ready. That way you'll get a better harvesting. But you can see there are quite a few flowers still coming on here. So we've got some small beans, such as this here, several pink flowers, and there's more flower buds coming. And also, because I've taken off those beans the plant's now going to focus its energy on producing more flowers and producing more beans. So instead of all the energy going into fattening these up and fattening up the seeds, the energy from that plant is now going to go into new growth and going to continue growing. And these can go for quite a while. It does depend on the variety. Some of the really dwarf varieties, they'll kind of finish after 2 or 3 months. They won't put out any more strong growth. If you've got some of the slightly larger bush bean variety, they might go on for the whole summer and you get a longer crop. It just depends on how much space you've got. Do you want to have a really long cropping bean but you need more space, or do you want a shorter season bean but you don't have to have as much space for it? And of course, if you've got loads of space, you can grow the normal climbing French beans, and those will give you a crop all summer long. So that's all for this video. A very quick update. Basically just keep them well fed, well watered. Again, keep them in a really warm position. As much sunlight as you can give it at this stage. The plant needs lots of sunlight to get all that energy for creating the beans. Harvest them regularly and feed them regularly, and you should get a crop for probably about 2 or 3 months. After that time, the plant's going to weaken and just die. They are quite short-lived plants, the dwarf beans. But that's all you need to do, and as I say, keep re-sowing the beans. These ones, don't let them get fat enough to form beans, so you won't be sowing them from the plant itself. So I would recommend just using the original packet of seeds and planting more as time goes on, so you've got a continual crop.